All right. Good morning. Hope everyone can hear me. Everyone's having a good day. I know it's a little gloomy outside, but that's okay. All right. I think I'm going to get started here. I think we have everyone's here. So, all right. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here for today's webinar on working alone and in isolation. This webinar is proudly presented in collaboration with WorkSafeBC. In this webinar, our speakers will provide an overview of the legislative roles and responsibilities, physical and psychological hazards, our CSSHSA resources, and sector best practices. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to take the time to acknowledge that CSSHSA provides services to, lives, and works on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territories of more than 200 distinct First Nations in British Columbia. In our work and in our lives, we are committed to listening and learning, to walking the path of truth and reconciliation, and to working in partnership with Indigenous organizations, leaders, and communities to ensure workplace health and safety is safe, inclusive, and culturally relevant. With respect, I'd like to take this time to express my gratitude to the Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit people and their ancestors who have lived on and cared for these lands for generations so that we can all gather here today. Um, I'm calling in from the lands of the stolen and ancestral lands of the Katsi and Simahu people in Claydon, Surrey, where I live. And I welcome you to acknowledge the land you are coming from in the chat box. This webinar is designed to help workers, supervisors, and employers in the community social services sector to understand their roles and responsibilities under WorkSafe BC health and safety legislation and to learn practical strategies for preventing and responding to risks associated with working alone and in isolation. Whether you are in a remote geographical location, working in the community, or an isolated or confined part of the workplace, working alone and in isolation presents unique challenges. And so to ensure a smooth and engaging session, here are a few tips to use our chat and Q&A features. I'm going to be moderating the chat and I will address any common questions that fall outside the speaker scope. We encourage you to interact and respond to each other's questions when relevant. If you have any questions to the speaker, please use the Q&A box. Our speakers will address any questions after the presentation. And let's make this session as interactive and collaborative as possible. I'm pleased to introduce the knowledgeable and passionate speakers joining us today, each bringing unique expertise in supporting the safety and well-being of the workers who work alone and in isolation. From WorkSafeBC, we have Corey Greischuk, industry and program specialist with prevention programs and services. Corey focuses on positively influencing health and safety behaviors across BC through consultation and education. She works in collaboration with industry associations, labor organizations, and safety partners, including CSSHSA, to prevent or to build safer workplaces through prevention-focused strategies. Then we have from CSSHSA, we have two valued team members. First is Therese Barroso, Engagement and Wellness Coordinator. Therese brings a background in psychology and project management, along with trauma-informed client-centered experience. She is committed to supporting social services workers who face mental health challenges and workplace risks, and is passionate about fostering inclusive, collaborative environments through practical tools and resources. Next is Tigran by Gorich, CEO at CSSHSA. Tigran is a seasoned healthcare and health and safety leader with deep expertise in organizational safety culture and leading complex provincial initiatives. Known for collaborative, growth-minded leadership, he excels in guiding teams towards healthier, safer workplaces. Outside of work, he enjoys coaching, fencing, family time, and traveling throughout BC and beyond. And finally, our last speaker, we are joined by Natalia Roraff, Health and Safety Manager at Coast Mental Health. Natalia brings a strong background in human resources, labor relations, and organizational psychology. Since joining Coast Mental Health in 2020, she has led the development of award-winning safety programs across more than 50 sites. Her leadership connects strategy with frontline realities, all in service of protecting and empowering workers. Please join me in welcoming Corey, Therese, Tigran, and Natalia. We're glad to have you with us today. I'll pass it over to Corey to get us started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jackie. Hope everybody can see my presentation. Good morning. I am very pleased to present on this important topic and section of Part 4 of the Occupational Health and Safety Regulation, General Conditions. I would also like to acknowledge that I'm thankful to be presenting today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded or treaty territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Tsawwassen nations. I'll be speaking to the applicable working alone regulation, working alone or in isolation regulation, and some suggested questions to assist with determining if workers are working alone or in isolation. First off, when we look at the regulation, there is the definition. This was first enacted back in February 1st, 2008. Along with that, there were some regulation requirements for specific sections. And then later on in 2012, there were some revisions and additional sections regarding review of procedures, working alone check-in procedures, checking the well-being of workers was added. And I will be speaking to the related guidelines for a majority of these sections. If you're not familiar with guidelines, I will provide an explanation. One common use of a guideline is to provide information about compliance, where a section sets out very broad-based requirements, referred to as performance-based requirements. And so this section fits into that performance-based requirements. In terms of the related OH&S guideline for 4.2.1, I have added towards the end of my presentation some questions to help with determining assistance that is readily available. I think that is a question that is posed to a lot of people in trying to determine, is somebody working alone or in isolation? But before I get to that, let's first off discuss what is being assigned to work alone or in isolation mean. It means that a worker is directed or expected to work during a scheduled or predetermined period of time, such as a specified work shift or a specified portion of a work shift. Perhaps you have overlapping workers that are working where there is a portion of their shift where they might be working alone or in isolation. During that time, it is anticipated or expected that that worker will just be doing that. They will be working alone or in isolation. What about workers who work alone in isolation for short or intermittent periods of time without being directed to do so? Employers still have obligations to ensure the health and safety of these workers, even though the provisions of sections 4.20.2 to 4.23 may not apply. The Workers' Compensation Act, Section 21, duties of an employer applies, and specifically there are requirements under 3.18 regarding first aid and effective means of communication, and 4.28 under workplace violence and the need for a risk assessment. So regardless if somebody is assigned to work alone or to be working alone, if they're not being directed to do so, there's still health and safety requirements. However, that these specific sections, if they're not assigned to, may not apply. In front of you is section part 4.20.2. On these next few slides, I've highlighted who the duty holder is listed under the Workers' Compensation Act. So if you look at this slide, you'll see the employer is highlighted. Overall responsibility falls to the employer. But looking at this slide, what is this describing? Maybe an assessment process. Where else might you see this process? Well, in violence in the workplace, the risk assessment process under R4.28-1, this would be very, very similar in terms of what is required to determine what the hazards are, identifying and eliminating them, and if not practical, minimizing the risk from the hazard. So to determine specific situations that may expose workers to hazards, consider factors such as the occupations and locations that may be at a higher risk. Some assistance in making this determination is available by consulting the assigned hazard rating list under Part 3 of the Occupational Health and Safety Guidelines, which provides a hazard rating for various occupations and industries. All CSSHSA levy classification units are listed as a low hazard rating. The assigned hazard rating by WorkSafeBC should be considered the minimum acceptable hazard rating for workplaces of employers assigned to that classification unit. Types of tasks that may place workers at higher risk. Higher risk tasks may include working with machinery or equipment, working from heights, or other activities where serious accidents or injuries have occurred in the past. Types of foreseeable interactions that may place workers at higher risk. When we're considering social services and the many interactions that workers do, higher risk interactions may include enforcing rules and policies, limiting service access, dealing with access control to buildings or to workers, working with aggressive or unpredictable clients, guests, tenants, or other interactions that may involve aggravated individuals. While the size and type of the workplace and the nature of the work will dictate the complexity of the assessment, it should generally follow the process outlined on this slide. There is also a recent incidents link on WorkSafeBC that has incidents listed by working alone and can be sorted by industry subsector, such as healthcare and social services. And this could be useful in determining similar workplaces and what type of incidents may be occurring. In addition, consider other factors, such as the specific workplace layout, including furniture design, emplacement, and the location of entrance and exits. The location of the workplace and the emergency response time necessary to get there in the event of an emergency. This is where you can refer to the first aid assessment that's been done for the workplace. Whether or not the worker may be attacked by an animal or encounter a poisonous material, the climate of the work environment, including whether or not the worker may be exposed to extreme weather conditions or temperatures, perhaps outreach work during different seasons, whether or not the work is physically demanding so that the worker may be fatigued, age, experience, and training of the workers who may be at risk. Are there casuals or new or young employees or workers assigned to work alone or in isolation? The type of equipment, tools, and supplies available for use, including the emergency communication equipment and emergency supplies, such as your food, drinking, water, and appropriate first aid equipment. And whether or not the worker has to carry all of those pieces of equipment with them during their work activities. And work activities which take a worker out of a safe or a more controlled environment, such as security sweeps. Staff deployment and scheduling, including the extent to which persons work at night, and then that system for checking up on workers who work alone. So under the Workers' Compensation Act, every employer must ensure the health and safety of all workers working for that employer and any other workers present at a workplace at which, that employer work is being carried out. An employer must establish occupational health and safety policies and programs in accordance with the regulations. So this relates to procedures for checking the well-being of workers. From 2020 to year-to-date in 2025, I took a look at the open data source that is available on the WorkSafeBC site, and all of the CSSHSA levied classification units. This particular regulation, 4.21, was cited 64 times with 53 employers when our officers were visiting workplaces. The two CUs where that was listed a little bit more frequently were CU 766007, which is counseling or social services. That was cited 34 times with 27 employers. And in CU 766017, residential social service facility, it was cited 27 times with 24 different employers. So the focus here is looking at time intervals when we're checking the well-being of workers. And they should be developed after considering the risk to which the worker is exposed, and they must be developed in consultation with the worker assigned to work alone or in isolation, and with the Joint Committee or Worker Health and Safety Representative as applicable, depending on what you have available at your workplace. In addition, there's 6 components to making sure that you have a procedure that meets the regulatory requirements for checking the well-being of workers. Here, again, workers are involved in that process. So in selecting procedures to check on the well-being of workers, employers should give preference to a procedure which allow for the visual confirmation of the worker's well-being. However, that may not always be practical or possible. So an alternative is two-way voice contact between workers at the site. Where that's not practical, employers may use other approaches. For example, an employer could require workers to make phone calls at regularly scheduled intervals to workers at another location. The procedure will include contacting the worker if a missed check-in or initiating emergency assistance. This could be internal to the organization following your first aid procedures and response, and may also involve external agencies. You can consider how the first aid assessment and written first aid procedures for the workplace could be used to assist this process. This assessment considers the remoteness and accessibility to BC emergency health services. Involve workers and Joint Health and Safety Committee in the procedure development. Those workers or persons checking on the well-being of the worker must be trained in the written procedure. And also how to initiate a response for missed check-ins. There are particular sections in this regulation which I won't be referring to because they apply to late night retail premises. So I'm not going to go into detail on those parts. However, keep in mind any social enterprises attached to operations and how those workers may be working alone or in isolation. And just for your information, late night hours means anytime between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. And late night retail premises means a gas station or other retailing fuel outlet or a convenience store or any other retail store where goods are sold directly to consumers. That is open to the public for late night hours. Lastly, the regulation of 4.23 requires annual reviews of the procedures. So here I've highlighted checking well-being of worker, since this will apply broadly to organizations within community social services. Annual review required at minimum or more frequently if changes to work environment that could adversely impact the violence prevention program, a worker's well-being or safety, or report that the procedures, policies, or work environment arrangements are ineffective. So that communication coming back from the individuals that are perhaps following up on any missed check-ins, as well as the workers that are working in those alone or in isolation situations, helps make sure that the procedure is actually working as designed and as written and planned. So lastly, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to just go over a few questions to consider when working alone or in isolation. So again, questions to consider when you're making that determination. Are there others present? Typically, customers are not considered to meet the definition of assistance that is readily available. So we have to think in terms of clients or service recipients could be considered similarly. Again, remember they have to, in terms of response, clients and service recipients likely would not fall under the Workers' Compensation Act. So can arrangements be made with other employers with workers in the same area? Are there shared buildings or workspaces by different employers? Employers would need to ensure that the workers of both employers are capable of and willing to provide assistance, and that workers are aware of the arrangement and should put that arrangement in writing. Again, having that documentation so that everybody knows what the expectations are from both workers of different employers. Ultimately, if a worker cannot be seen or heard by persons capable of providing assistance in a timely manner, then the worker should be regarded as working alone or in isolation. Finally, on a few of the previous slides, for example, an earlier slide where I was talking about different terms, I wanted to just define those just to make it easier for understanding. So the term practicable was used. It means that is what's reasonably capable of being done. So an objective test based on what a reasonable person with full knowledge of the situation would determine in the circumstances. That person will need to have adequate training, education, and experience in order to be knowledgeable of the work and the hazards. So that allows somebody to make sure that you're doing your due diligence, that you've had the process in place, and that you've gone through those steps to make sure that you've assessed whether somebody is working alone or in isolation and met all the regulatory requirements. Sorry, I'll just pass that on to Therese momentarily as soon as I stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Corey. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. All right. I'll take it from here to talk about the hazards of working alone with a focus on psychosocial hazards. Just a little bit about me. I spent 2 years doing outreach work in downtown East Side, so I know firsthand what it's like to work alone. And in social services, working alone is often, just part of the job. Whether it's through home visits, community outreach, or accompanying clients to appointments, those are all working alone, even though we're working with a client. And I'll discuss that a little bit more. And while this work can be incredibly rewarding, it also comes with unique physical and psychosocial risks. And what I really hope you take away from this part of the presentation is greater awareness, just a bit of awareness for both yourselves and your coworkers of the visible and not so visible hazards of working alone. Okay, so from Corey's presentation, you now have an understanding of what we mean when we talk about working alone or in isolation. So I'm actually curious to know how many of you are actually watching this webinar alone at this moment. Let's see what that looks like. Thanks, Jackie. If you could just answer the poll, that will be great. It'll be a good understanding of how many are actually working alone at this moment, watching this webinar alone. And again, my goal for this part of this presentation is just a greater awareness of what that looks like for you. Awesome. Oh, that's great that not a lot of people are actually working alone, which is quite common in social services. It's quite hard to work from home when you're providing services to clients. Okay, let's go to the next poll. I wanted to ask this next question again to help us start building awareness, and the tools and resources that we'll be talking about later on might directly apply to you, especially if working alone is something you do regularly. So the next question is, Jackie, if you could just launch this poll, the second poll. So how often do you work alone or remotely? And again, when we say remotely, this could include working from home. So what does that look like for you? Is it daily, most of the week? Most of the week can be 3 times a week, and then maybe a few times a week could be 2 days, and then occasionally. Okay, that's very interesting. I'll wait for more people to answer the question. So very few are never. Occasionally, I would say when I was in the social services sector, I was also doing like occasional work from home. Really depends, but it's really hard to work from home in this sector. Awesome. Thank you so much for participating. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about hazard categories just to get us thinking about ourselves and our coworkers and how the risk of certain hazards can increase when working alone. As I go through each of these categories, what I'd like you to do is picture someone you work with, or even yourself who might be exposed to these risks when working alone and in isolation. Just an example, I used to do OHS building inspection. That's part of my role as an OHS rep. And one example is our maintenance workers' workspace was actually in the basement. So I was doing monthly inspections, and he was a veteran, he was experienced, had really good lock-in procedures. He's retired now, but he has really good lock-in procedures. But because of his experience, no one really thought about how isolated his workspace was. So if something were to happen for 2 hours or more, nobody would pass by or even see him if he was there. So while social services workers, frontline workers, are often at higher risk for psychosocial hazards, it's also important to remember that other roles in the sector can also be affected by working alone. So let's go through the main categories of hazards. So we have physical hazards, which is really, physical, like machinery cuts, burns, slips, and trips. I'll expand on this a little bit more, much more specifically to our sector. For chemical hazards, this is really, think about custodians or anyone working alone with toxic substances, like cleaning agents, fumes, or disinfectants. What does it look like for them when they work alone and then they use these chemicals? And what are the hazards? What the hazards look like when they work alone? For biological hazards, this could affect your life skills workers if you have that. But this is generally staff supporting, residential cleanups, dealing with bed bugs, harm reduction services. If you provide harm reduction services, that's a biohazard in terms of needles, possible exposure to illicit substances. We have now, with smoking becoming more popular in substance use, then that's a different type of hazard as well. So what are the risks when that work is done alone? With ergonomics, I know this is often not at a focus in the social services sector, but this applies to everyone. So this is really staff who sit for long hours. So if you're sitting all the time or work from home, this is quite a hazard. And I'll give you a quick personal example. A month ago, I recently visited my chiropractor because I was constantly getting headaches from my setup. And in one of our Zoom meetings, I had to turn off my camera because I could barely lift my head because of the pain. So economic ergonomics matter. What I learned is the 90 rule, 90 degree, which means if you're set up right now, kind of like just do a quick assessment, look at your setup. What this really means is your knees, elbows, and hips need to be at a 90-degree angle. So making adjustments into your to your workspace. Because again, when you're working alone, especially from home, there's nobody checking in on you. So just thinking about those. And another thing to consider with ergonomics is musculoskeletal injuries, MSI. For those lifting groceries, if your role is assisting clients, what happens when you're doing that alone and you encounter a back pain? What does that look like? Do you report it? And the other, last but not the least, is psychosocial hazards. I'll explore this a little bit more deeply today, but these hazards, all of these can, with psychosocial, it can lead to feelings of isolation, stress, or disconnection from the team. So as we go through these, keep thinking about the people in your workplace and yourself who might be affected, not just the obvious frontline roles, but anyone who works alone for long stretches. Okay, so why am I highlighting physical and psychosocial hazards in particular? It's because people working in our sector are far more likely to face violence than the average BC worker, and that mental health injury claims are becoming more common in the sector. And when we're working alone and in isolation, those risks even increase. And even if we build strong rapport and trust with clients, those risks can still, increase. For example, just when I was working alone, I once had to monitor a supportive housing building of 110 residents. So there are 110 residents, and it was just me. And one resident, this is just kind of like a really one-time thing that happened was one resident refused to leave the office that I was in. And they were upset with management. So they were venting about management. They were venting about staff. Eventually, they got upset with me. So I kept trying to de-escalate the situation. I had some training with nonviolence. Again, that's one of the control measures that you put in place. But at the same time, when you're working alone, it's really hard to mediate the situation without the support system. I tried my best to really de-escalate the situation. I asked them that I'm working right now. I need to assist other residents, but they wouldn't back down. So it wasn't until our executive director, who happened to be stopping by from another office, intervened at the situation that it was resolved. So again, that was a tough moment because when you're alone, you don't have immediate backup. So that's something that you have to think about in terms of personal safety threats. If you can think of any examples, just like the one that I had that you'd like to share, feel free to share it in the chat. And let's go to environmental risks. So these are the risks that really involves that may be outside of your control, and this is just the environment that we work in. An example of this was when I was a life skills worker. I have to declutter units or pick up needles on my own. So again, that carry a lot of risk, but having a radio reduced it. What are your mechanisms for those risks is really important to also assess. There are also the unknown guests. I think Corey mentioned this earlier. A common challenge for those who do home visits or outreach, especially in domestic violence situations. It's really hard to ask the person to leave, especially if your client wants them to stay. So again, look, even with the best intentions in those situations can escalate quickly, and it becomes really difficult for the worker to manage that situation alone. And with emergency situations on here, what I mean by this is not your client having an emergency situation, it's you. So let's say when the worker is the one experiencing the emergency, for example, I work from home. And unless my fiance is around, if something happened, say I passed out, how would my coworkers know? So as we go through this webinar and the tools that will be shared later on, what I'd like you to think about is this question. If you were working alone right now, how would your coworkers or supervisors know you're okay? So just something to consider. Now, when we talk about working alone in isolation, it means being separated from coworkers who share similar training, experience, and understanding of the work as you. Without the regular contact, those check-ins, shared debriefs, or even informal brainstorming moments, it's easy to start feeling disconnected from the team, especially for those who work from home. I know COVID forced us to disconnect, and this disconnection can sometimes lead to interpersonal strain when there's limited communication, fewer opportunities to know one another, especially with new staff, anonymity increases, and which then create tension and misunderstandings among coworkers. So the interpersonal conflict increases when there's lack of connection between team members. So it's really important to be intentional with how you connect. The rest of the hazards on here, which is the emotional load, these hazards are already common in our sector, and even when you're not working alone. But these hazards are exacerbated when you are working alone. For example, the constant exposure to trauma and crisis is often just part of our work. But when you don't have someone to process those experiences with, the emotional load can become heavy and relying only on, oftentimes we just rely on our own coping mechanisms, which can help for a little bit, but having someone who understands your experience, who listens and validates what you've been through, really lightens the emotional weight of those pressure. Then we have stress and burnout. We see this a lot in this field. We make a lot of decisions based not only on community needs, but also organizational values. But oftentimes we make our own decisions based on our discretion. And it makes a huge difference to have someone share those decisions with, to ask if you're having uncertainty, to ask, your coworker for their perspective. But if you're working alone, you have to make those decisions alone, which can be very stressful. The other piece that is when responding to emergencies alone, like I mentioned earlier, I had that situation where I was monitoring a building of 110. Let's say somebody experiences an emergency, it would just be me. So that's a lot of pressure for one person. This is an example of this one as well is in our protocol, we require two people to be on shift so that nobody is in that situation where 110 residents are there, but one staff. So the ratio is a little bit off. But our procedure is because sometimes somebody happens to call in sick and then you end up working alone. So those things happen. So our policy for that is, if there is an emergency, unfortunately, the only way the staff can help is call 911. They weren't required to respond directly because they had no backup. So again, like think about what those looks like and what are your procedures when it comes to assigning shifts to people to make sure that they're not working alone. The other psychosocial hazards, underreporting. Underreporting is already common without working alone. But again, this is exacerbated when you're working alone. Because when working alone, people tend to minimize incidents. Oh, it's just a small trip. It's not worth reporting. But those minor things matter, especially because there's no coworker nearby to say, hey, that was close. Maybe we should document it. So again, like underreporting of near misses of incidents often occur and at a higher, it's often missed because you're working alone in isolation and nobody is telling you, hey, like maybe we should report it. And nobody's a witness to those incidents as well. So there's, that accountability piece of, are you going to be reporting that? So just keep that in mind. Make sure that you're encouraging people to report. Also, if you're a leader in the webinar, make sure you also provide multiple avenues for workers to report, either through check-ins, inspections, incident report forms. So that's just one mechanism to alleviate that risk. And lastly, I want to touch on harassment, just because this happened in my experience. Even when we know our clients, well, oftentimes when you build that rapport, people are more comfortable going into the units alone. I mean, that's just completely normal. You build rapport, the person's more comfortable, you're more comfortable going into the unit alone. However, behavior can change depending on the person's mental state and current circumstances. Just one example was one female worker was supporting an older male client with complex care. And over time, the client grew comfortable and his behavior started crossing personal boundaries. He became overly touchy. It was very confusing and uncomfortable for the worker, especially without a coworker to step in or validate her experience and help her decide what to do next. So these are just some examples to show that psychosocial hazards of working alone, they don't often happen in, with traumatic incidents. Psychosocial hazards grow from quietly from disconnection, emotional strain, or the lack of immediate support. So those are like the minor things that could exacerbate and eventually lead to burnout or somebody going into psychological injury. Now, I just want to highlight some factors that increase the risk. And some of them have been mentioned by Corey earlier today. One of them, let's start with new and young workers. So they often have less experience and may not recognize the full range of risk in the sector. That's why it's so important that they receive proper orientation, mentoring, and ongoing support early on. They need to know the risk right away of what the sector is about. Home visits and community outreach are a big one, again, because every environment is different, and oftentimes workers can't always predict what or who will encounter. The unpredictability of those spaces even adds to those risks. Working from home or remotely, yeah, this might seem at glance, yeah, it's safe because you're working in your own environment, but it can increase risk in other ways like disconnection, lack of visibility, isolation, not having anyone nearby if an emergency happens. We also have encounters with unexpected visitors. I touched on this earlier, but also this includes pets. I know like pets are cute and all, but if you encounter pets and then you didn't expect it, it could be startling. Driving clients or traveling between sites is another hazard because set of risk of isolation on the road or also potential incidents while transporting others. Loss of communication or cell service. This is particular in remote areas where the signal might not be as good. But again, if something goes wrong, it's a reminder of why check-in procedures and communication plans are so important. And last but not the least, handling cash or valuables. I was just thinking about the finance or admin roles who may be carrying cash when they need to. And also some organizations in the sector who have thrift stores. So this applies to them. Again, having cash can make someone more vulnerable to theft or aggression if they're working alone. Each of these factors doesn't necessarily mean something will go wrong, but again, being aware of them helps you plan ahead, communicate, and create sort for working conditions for everyone. And this is not an exhaustive list. So if you can think of any factors that increase the risk of working alone or in isolation, please share them in the chat box. I'm sure others would probably have some similar risks as well. And there are a few simple but powerful ways to protect your well-being and stay connected while working alone. So these are just some personal strategies that you can use for yourself so you're not at risk of isolation and also to make sure that you're protecting your well-being. So first thing is regular check-ins. So check-ins don't necessarily mean 1 hour or half hour with a person. Even just a quick good morning can make a huge difference. It's a reminder that you're still part of the team, even if you're physically on your own. Regular check-ins, even a short chat can reduce the sense of isolation and even prevent misunderstandings before they grow into conflict. With peer debriefs, this is about setting aside just a few minutes after a difficult situation to talk with a trusted coworker or supervisor who can help you process what happened and release some of that, emotional weight, alleviate that some emotional weight. When it comes to emergency support systems, these are some tools like mobile apps, panic buttons, or clear escalation procedures. I know, like working in the sector, had a radio, a walkie-talkie. Those are just some examples. It's really just to make sure that you don't have to carry the what if fear alone. And if you ever find yourself in an emergency or dealing with a tough incident with no one around to debrief with, again, there are options for workers available as well. Let's say I'm working in the evening overnight, and I have nobody to debrief with after a traumatic incident. There are options out there like the Care to Speak program, the Mobile Response Team, WorkSafeBC's Critical Incident Response Program are just some examples of immediate help that you can reach out to. And finally, training and preparation do go a long way. So taking part in refreshers or workshops with your team, it's not just about learning new skills together, it's about connection. Learning together helps build you confidence together, reminds you that you're not doing this work alone. I encourage you to check out CSSHSA's training calendar just for opportunities to connect, share, and grow alongside your peers. Okay, I'll pass it over to Tigran, who will expand on available resources for you.
Mhm. Perfect. Thank you, Therese. Those were all really great examples of working alone and the hazards that we face. And for me personally, it was in my career when I was doing health and safety consulting. I used to be working in a lot of different remote areas. So it was oftentimes BC hydro projects that where I would drive in the middle of winter for hours, where you would maybe, if you're lucky, saw one or two cars in that 3, 4 hour drive. And so those are definitely times I remember vividly still, where you kind of feel scared, like what if something happens? What if I have a car accident? What if I hit a moose? That almost happened. So oftentimes we definitely do risk assessment to kind of mitigate some of those risks. I see in the chat, Allison posted pushing wheelchairs and physical assistance in community living while doing transfers. One example that came up recently was one facility in community living was got a beautiful new bath for their clients, and one of the things wasn't set up properly, so the whole bathtub flipped over, and the client flew out of the and the water flew out and created a lot of flooding. And so you can imagine if that person was alone, what kind of challenges they would have, and what kind of experience the client is going through in that type of situation. So looking and assessing all the risks is really, really important, and it's part of our duty as employers, as colleagues. We do to do the right due diligence for our clients and our staff. I'm going to walk you through just how do you do this? How do you set up your working alone procedures and program? So I'm going to walk you through some of our resources. We have created a few different templates. We have a program template with roles and responsibilities, and it includes a working alone plan. We also set up an education e-module for you guys so that you have it could be for your workers, it could be for your Josh committees, for your managers, and it's also really important that you build this into your new hire orientation. We have a few additional tools, which is the check-in frequency guide, the working alone manual, the check-in form, and we did a brief review of some of the apps that are common in our sector. So we're going to walk you through that a little bit. So I'm gonna do share my screen right now, and I'm gonna just walk you through some of these tools to help to show you how easy it is to set up your working alone program. It's not intimidating. I know in safety we talk a lot of technical stuff, and it can get overwhelming, but it can also be really easy. And our job is to make sure that we have these templates so that we can help you set up your working alone program if that's what you need to. You can always reach out and have a consult with our team. And so let me just share my screen for a second. There you go. So what we're working on right now with our team is something called a program builder. So the program builder is meant to kind of create all these different templates that you would need to put together your health and safety program or your health and safety manual. In case you're missing some templates or some procedures, we're starting to put that all together. It's not quite ready yet, I would say. We still have a few things to set up, but the working alone page is ready. So how do you find this? If you go on our webpage, you'll find a little tab here called Program Builder. So far, we've only had a few different pages that we launched, but the you can find working alone right here. And on that working alone page, you'll find a different template. So you'll see the program template, the plan template, the online course. It's going to be launching very soon. We're just doing a few more feedbacks, incorporating the wonderful feedback we received from our community of practice. We also have a manual check-in form, a working alone isolation guide that links you directly to WorkSafeBC, check-in frequency guide. So I know there was a question regarding check-in frequency, so we can walk through that, and the review for the apps. You'll see each of these pages is structured with a little bit of an intro, the forms, it has the WorkSafeBC links to the regulation, and then what are the essentials that employers need to know, the legal requirements, brief overview, apps, and then it talks about some of the practices. So our team, Jackie and Savannah, did a wonderful job putting these together. And over the next couple of months, we're going to start populating our website with these new pages. So just have a little bit more patience for us. Our small team is working really hard to prepare all of these materials for you. So I'll start with the working alone program template. So every organization should have a health and safety manual. That manual is the guide on how to enact your program within your organization. You can have the working alone pieces within that manual, or you can have it as a separate little policy program piece. So in this case, we set it up as a separate policy piece. You'll see there's a template here. You can take out our logo, replace it with your own logo. In the top corner, we do version control so that you can keep track of the versions. And this is really important when you have a large organization of many hundreds of people, but it could be also used for medium-sized organizations. It's really important that you have sustainment built in. So we know in large organizations, there's oftentimes turnover in terms of the managers and supervisors. So having these types of policies helps with sustainment and helps with clarity in terms of whose role it is to do what when it comes to health and safety. So how we set up these templates is really always kind of structured in the same way. You can see, you can replace this with your own organization's name. This is for version control, this table up here. And then they have a table of contents. So I'm just kind of walking you through this a little bit. So a lot of our templates will have sort of this highlighted yellow section, and in this highlighted yellow section is just really the guidelines on how to do the setup. It's meant to really make it easy to facilitate to set this up on your own. After you completed this, you just delete everything that is highlighted. Anything that is green is sort of been modified to the CSS sector, and you can remove it as necessary as you see how it fits in the organization. Anytime you see anything orange, it's meant to replace your organization's name or department. So as you can see, this really guides you through the setup. So every program is structured very similarly. It starts with a purpose, the scope, the organization that it involves. We have some summary of the regulations and the standards, and we usually have a glossary and abbreviations built in. So you'll see the definition of working alone and definition of hazard, definition of risk, definition of supervisor, so that for clarity purposes. So even if you're not a health and safety professional, so you can pick this up and really understand how to set up your working alone program. As we roll further, we get into roles and responsibilities. So you might have to tailor this to your organization. So what is the role of the directors? It is to endorse and promote the working alone program and requirements. It is to provide resources needed to be able to set up the program and assign clarity of roles and responsibilities. Then we get into the managers and supervisors roles, and then we get to the roles of the employers and volunteers and health and safety committee. So this is how we generally structure all of our health and safety programs and policies to ensure that like they meet all the WorkSafeBC requirements. So once we get into past the roles and responsibilities, you kind of get into a bit of procedure here. So are there any conditions where working alone is prohibited? So there might be sometimes situations where you don't want your staff working alone. It really will depend on your organization. Obviously, we work with clients, so there's always the risk of violence. So you can't just say, well, we're not going to work with clients. Obviously, that's not an option. But maybe you have a snowstorm and you have a foot of snow. Do you want your staff going out at that point? Maybe, certain conditions that might come up that you think, well, this is not, we really don't want our staff in this situation. Maybe when they go into an SRO, they should have another person with them. It really depends. Like you have to assess the risk and understand like the situation that the staff will be in, what kind of risks are they facing, and tailor this to your organization. The second piece, and we talked a lot about this, so working alone you have to do a risk assessment for what type of procedures will come up where the staff will be working alone. In this case, we don't want to necessarily duplicate our processes. You want to know that you can leverage your existing health and safety policies. So maybe you have a general risk assessment, maybe you've done a violence risk assessment, maybe you do your workplace inspections. So what type of hazards are coming up? Make sure that you track all of those key areas where you're doing risk assessment to identify the highest risks and the lowest risks when the person is working alone. And so you kind of tailor this to your organization, assess the different situations, and then we get into like how to set up the plan. So I'm going to walk you through the plan in a second as well. At the minimum, you should have the template plan filled out if you don't have a this program policy. But I would advise you do both for your organization if you don't have anything in your health and safety manual already. So as we get into the plan, it's in terms of like what type of procedure and training do you need. And as we get into the training, you really have to get very specific. So how are you going to train your staff? You're going to want to train them on the check-in procedures, on the emergency response, on the working alone plan, and the steps to identify and report hazards. So those are some key training areas. You could also add another bullet point. You could ask them to do our working alone course or whatever you think is appropriate for your organization. Feel free to leverage any of our training opportunities that we have on our website. All of those are freely available to social service members in our organization. And then you have to have a bit of a program review. So how often are you going to review this? At the minimum, we would recommend probably an annual review, and you have a version control table. So it's a short document relatively. A lot of the stuff is already well outlined in alignment with the regulation. So there's a few areas where you need to kind of make some changes. So I would recommend that you set up an example like this for your organization if you don't have a policy already. Accompanying this program is a template for working alone plan. So this plan is sort of the guide in it gets a little bit more specific. So in here you would list because the regulation requires that you consult with the JOSH committee and the workers. This is your sort of like way of being able to do that is just a simplistic way. There's many other ways you can do it, of course. You would, list the responsible manager and the worker who is working alone, or maybe the whole department is working alone. So in that case, maybe you want to list the name of that department. And this template starts with a bit of definitions, and then you want to really look at the description of the work. So in this box here, you want to outline what are the types of activities, tools, equipment, what are they doing that puts them at risk of working alone. You don't have to write a ton of stuff, but a couple paragraphs to explain the situation would be helpful so that when you're onboarding a new person, they can kind of get up to speed really quickly and understand the risks that they face in their work. And we've given an example here in red, so feel free to take that out. Feel free to take out the yellow highlighted. The yellow highlighted is really the guides on how to do this. Section 3, you would list the shift start and end time ranges. So like when is the shift starting and so when are they possibly working alone in during their work? And then we get into a procedure. So there's an example of procedure that's listed here. You can modify it to your needs. This is just one example of how to do it. If you're not using an app or if you're not using some kind of complex tools, this is one way to do it. You would list the time intervals for check-in. So that usually means that the start of the shift, you would designate a check-in interval that is appropriate to the type of work. And then you would have something at the end of the work shift so that they can check out of their shift. So knowing that they're safe and they've completed their task. Here's an example of primary communication is text messaging. So you could do a phone call or you could do a text messaging. With text messaging, you have sort of like a track record and you can show due diligence. So sometimes that could be convenient. Or, you could have a secondary backup communication method here. In this case, it was an app-based tracking tool that is used in some cases. Then we have a hazard assessment section. So in the hazard assessment section, you would list, what are the methods that you assess the hazards within your organization. It could be inspections, it could be a general risk assessment, it could be your data from your violence risk assessment, and you would list some of the hazards that the person is facing. And then in section 6, we would have escalation protocol. So if the person didn't check in, how are we going to check in, make sure that they're safe? How much response time do we give them if they haven't responded in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, are we going to go on site now and check in with them, or are we going to text somebody else who is nearby? Like, how are we going to make sure that they're safe? It happens a lot, and so how do we ensure that the escalation protocol is set up? Like, if this is late at night, who's checking in with them? Is it another colleague, or is it their supervisor? Or you really have to kind of spell it out so that it's clear for everybody what the protocol is. And then really this next section talks about the training. So what are we training them on? So we want to train them on the communication tools, train them on the incident response, train them on the post-incident support, and we want to train them on the emergency procedures and how to identify hazards when new things come up in their work that maybe weren't listed here. So those are some examples that could easily be tailored to your organization, but a lot of good information is already listed here, and it's easy to modify. And then, of course, there's a couple of requirements from WorkSafe. So one is that this plan is reviewed by the Health and Safety Committee, so they can help consult on this. And of course, the worker themselves have to consult on the plan. And so there's a way to kind of check in and shows your due diligence as an organization that this has been done according to the regulation. And it also ensures that, the workers are aware that the JOSH committee is involved. And then you would have at the end here annual review. So how, make sure that this is updated on a regular basis. So those are a couple of examples of templates that we have prepared for you. I'm going to switch over to this web page again. So if you can see here, we have the program builder. So we are working on an online course. Like I said, there's an duration is about 15 to 30 minutes to complete. It's free to all the members. And the goal really is to describe roles and responsibilities around working alone, what the common hazards are, point of care risk assessment, how to conduct that, and some strategies. So it's one easy way for employer to show due diligence. You really want to set it up in a simple way. I think when you're setting up working alone program for the first time, I would say like just following up with staff to make sure that everyone gets into the habit of checking in is probably the most important part. Like you can buy the fanciest app, but if no one's using it after like a couple weeks, then the whole thing is a waste of money and it doesn't prove any due diligence at all. So you want to make sure that this is done properly when you set it up for your organization and follow up at the beginning till you create that habit. We have a simple manual check-in form here. We have a link here to the WorkSafeBC information. So they have additional information on the WorkSafeBC site. Always really good guides from them. So those are worth checking out if you're setting it up for the first time. We've also created this relative simple working alone check-in frequency guide. And I'm just going to click on this one. Give me a sec. And zooming in. So it helps you with your decision making. So examples of some high risk activities, there's examples of medium risk activities and low risk. And so maybe in a high risk situation, you want to have a more faster, quicker frequency of check-in. So maybe half an hour, maybe it's 2 hours. Maybe medium situation might be 2 to 4 hours. So it really depends on the types of situation. Think through it, consult your health and safety committee, get the participation of the workers to understand what's reasonable. You don't want to create a frequency check-in that is, not going to be followed because then the whole procedure is going to be pointless. So really find a good way to consult and get the workers to participate in this conversation. This is a really great guide prepared by our team, so I would encourage you to check it out. And then finally, we did a little bit of a app review. So let me just, I think I have it here. Sorry, give me a second. Yeah. The app The working alone apps, they allow for automatic check-ins. Workers can easily modify their check-in times. They also provide oftentimes GPS tracking. There's administrative dashboard. So as a supervisor, you can go in, you can track incidents, create audit reports. It's a really great way to show due diligence. And of course, you can have customizable emergency escalations and protocols. Oftentimes, some of these services have like a call-in center where somebody will follow up with a worker. Those are usually more expensive solutions, but you can also go with a sort of other simpler form where your supervisor follows up in those situations. So there's various ways to kind of set these up, and most of them do, I would say, very similar stuff. In this case, we reviewed four different solutions: Checkmate, Aware 360, Solus Guard, and Safety Line. We also checked in with OK alone and didn't receive any emails back, so this is why that one is not listed. But we know that a number of organizations are using it, so we are in consultation with some of them, and I think in down the road we were going to do a little bit of see if we can set up a bit of a RFP and make sure that we find a solution, maybe negotiate with one of them to get a better rate with the sector. So that's our little bit of a long-term goal right now. We're focusing on just developing these program builders. So in here, you have a little bit more information on each of them, just very high level, so that it helps guide your decisions if a working alone app is what you're looking for. So on that note, I'm going to pass it on to Natalia. Thank you.
Thank you, Tigran. All right. So good morning, everyone. Just want to give a welcome to this awesome session that's been put on by CSSHSA and team and Corey. My name is Natalia Broraff, and I'm the Health and Safety Manager here at Coast Mental Health. And so for the last little bit of this webinar, I will be sharing what Coast Mental Health's journey, realities, and what the lessons learned in supporting staff have been when it comes to working alone, both for our frontline roles as well as our administrative roles. So this presentation is grounded in really our lived experiences, as well as our standard operating procedure that we've developed to keep our people safe. This morning, I have the privilege and honor to be joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Squamish-speaking people, as well as the Hunkaminam-speaking people. And this includes the Coquitlam, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. So just a little bit about Coast Mental Health. We are not for profit, and we've been helping British Columbians who are living with mental illness find courage to recover since 1972. So do that math, that is 52 years. We shape the framework for community-based mental health care, and we do so by providing kind of three essential pillars for sustained recovery, and those are housing, support services, and employment and education. The people we serve, our clients, they do take the lead in their recovery, and they work alongside our team at Coast to set goals and determine which services and which programs will help to best achieve those goals. So looking at this map here, you can see that Coast Mental Health, you know, we have a lot of locations. You know, we provide nearly 1,100 homes with supported services across 53 facilities across the Lower Mainland and growing. We have over 800 employees and most of them are in client-facing roles. Now, the safety department's role at Coast Mental Health really is, in a nutshell, to oversee what the occupational health and safety system looks like at our organization. I want to recognize that the participants at this webinar today may or may not have a dedicated team of safety professionals and OHS professionals to help them with that. And a lot of this work might be being done off the side of the desk. So again, I want to give a really, heartfelt shout out to Tigran and team and Corey for this initiative. I've been with Coast, specifically the safety department, for over 4 years now. And again, my job is to oversee the occupational health and safety program, and that includes our working alone and isolation program. Our little safety team at Coast consists of myself. I'm the health and safety manager. We also have a senior health and safety advisor and our HR and safety coordinator. And our team directly reports to the chief of HR. So I want us to take a moment with some honesty, okay? We've heard a lot of great material over the last hour about working alone. And I really appreciated Teresa's points about some of the psychosocial hazards that come with working alone. Yeah, so I'll be honest, some days working alone can feel peaceful, it can feel productive. And other days it can feel like you're speaking into a void, right? No feedback, no energy, no sense of whether what you did today mattered. And at Coast Mental Health, we've seen both sides, okay? Our staff have shared stories of feeling empowered by independence, but they've also shared stories of uncertainty and vulnerability. And so here's kind of the shift I want us to take. It's that isolation isn't just a condition, it's an environment, right? And like any environment, we can learn to shape it. So one of my goals today is to help you shape your work environments so that working alone doesn't necessarily mean like feeling alone. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I hope that you'll walk away with some practical tools, although Tigran has provided quite a few. But I'll show, what Coast has in place for connection, well-being, and of course, compliance with the regulation. So I'll start by chatting about Coast's policy, our working alone program, and I'll share real stories from our sites and staff, as well as some actionable tools and strategies that you can feel free to use in your organization. So with the unique nature of work at Coast Mental Health and the frequency of working alone situations, the safety department has developed a set of guidelines and protocols to minimize the risk and ensure the well-being of those who work alone. At the root of Coast's working alone or an isolation program is our standard operating procedure, which I'll highlight on the screen here. It's on our intro, the working alone procedure C.3F.9. This policy has been in place since that time that the working alone legislation has come into play. But what the policy looked like 10, maybe a little bit more years ago would be unrecognizable from what it looks like today. And that is because we treat every OHS policy like a living document. So that requires regular review and reassessment at least annually to make sure that it's meeting legislative requirements, which Corey so eloquently explained to us. And also that it matches the reality on the ground. I really liked Teresa's story about the maintenance worker who may have been overlooked. That's why it's really important to continue to assess. So really, in other words, the document has and continues to evolve as our staff's working environments and risk levels do. So in the next few slides, we're going to dive a little bit more into what the Working Alone program looks like at Coast Mental Health and just some of its key elements. We'll focus on our standard operating procedure as well as our check-in form. And we have both of those located on our company intranet. The check-in form is listed just below the SOP. And most importantly, all staff, volunteers, and contractors have access to these materials, okay? So I'll be highlighting some of the key improvements we've made in the last few years when it comes to working alone, and also what we've done to address some common challenges and how we've handled those. Okay, so our standard operating procedure, working alone, SOP C.3F.9, it is in place to minimize risk to any staff working alone at Coast to protect their health and safety. Now it has some limitations. Okay, this policy is limited to covering all circumstances where a worker may be required to work alone or in isolation, but it does apply for all of those known times that a worker will be working alone or in isolation. Just an example, night shifts at some of our community homes. Importantly, our SOP applies whether staff are working alone on-site, off-site, or from home. I really enjoyed the poll that was done earlier. I wasn't able to participate, but I am currently working from home alone. So some of the key elements of our SOP include what the required check-in process is, okay? Including the required check-in frequency, which is based on risk, and it's determined on the risk level. So how often a worker needs to check in with their buddy or their shift partner or their supervisor, or sometimes what we call a sister site, will vary depending on your role and your environment. Okay. The standard operating procedure also outlines the required check-in documentation and record-keeping requirements that our staff need to follow. These actually go beyond WorkSafeBC regulation because we also follow accreditation standards. So we keep records a little bit longer than 2 weeks. And finally, it outlines provisions on what to do in case of a failed check-in. So in other words, what to do if the worker who is working alone cannot be reached, and what to do if there's an injury or an emergency. So I'd like to start off by talking about 3 key components of our Working Alone program. First off, the fact that working alone can happen on or off site. That's our reality at Coasts, and it sounds like it's the reality at many of your sites as well. So whether Coast Mental Health employee is on site or off site, working alone comes with specific responsibilities. So if any of our workers is working alone on or off site alone, they need to follow the SOP. And this entire procedure is actually covered in depth with all of our staff upon hire at not one, but two safety orientations. At the general safety orientation, which happens upon hire, and also at each site-specific safety orientation, which is done when a worker is enters a new site. Okay. So this means checking in with your shift partner at your sister site. In our SO standard operating procedure, also known as SOP, we have a master list of contact details of sister sites. And so it outlines all of the work locations that have workers working alone at night that we are aware of, and who they are supposed to call and when. Okay. It also means that our staff need to follow the minimum check-in frequencies that are outlined in Table 1 of our standard operating procedure, which I will not be showing today. Seems like my screen has gone off. Can everyone still hear and see me? Just testing.
We can hear you. I think your screen is back, but we don't see you.
Okay.
It's okay, but your screen.
That's okay. I'll just continue. If everyone can still see my screen, I'll just continue. Okay. So, typical work activities that our staff do when working alone or in isolation, they are all outlined in our standard operating procedure in a table. And then beside those, there are minimum check-in intervals for each activity. And again, this is introduced to all of our staff upon hire, and then again at their site-specific safety orientation. And it's important because check-in frequency is based on risk level, and different activities have different risk levels. So I'll just give a quick example. If you're working alone on site and interacting with clients in a common space, the minimum check-in frequency is every 2 hours. Okay. If one of our workers is working alone off-site, maybe doing outreach work and interacting with clients or non-associated persons or prospective clients, the minimum check-in interval is 30 minutes. So our program also outlines protocols that all staff need to adhere to when they're working alone. We've made these kind of like the standard across the board for all of Coast. All workers must carry a cell phone or radio with them at all times. Workers must not enter client rooms alone unless accompanied by another worker. Workers must not meet clients in office areas behind closed doors. And when taking clients off-site, the ratio of clients to staff must not be greater than 1 staff for 5 clients. Okay. Our program also includes some of appropriate procedures to be followed for client outings and driving clients. This was a task that we identified a few years ago, is that some of our staff are driving clients to appointments. And so our working alone program actually includes the full process for what a pre-departure planning and communication should look like, as well as what handling incidents during outings in a car when alone might look like. Okay. Fingers crossed we hadn't had any of those incidents, but we do have guidelines in our procedure for what to do just in case. Okay. Just bouncing off of what Tigran was saying earlier, we have implemented a few things that we do not want our workers to do at all when working alone. And so that is not entering client rooms unless accompanied by another worker. And then maintenance workers should never work alone during high-risk activities, such as working on high-voltage panels or using ladders over 10 feet or 3 meters. Now, when we shift over to workers working from home, although the risk level of working alone from home is low, workers are expected to be safe while working from home. And so essentially what we've implemented is a process that is simple and easy to follow. The supervisor or a designated person must check in with the worker every 3 hours, and this can be done either by text message, Teams chat, Zoom chat, or phone, via email or phone call. Okay. And last but certainly not least, I want to talk a little bit about check-in and documentation as well as record keeping. So documentations of all check-ins must be recorded to verify the check-in was done and to confirm that the staff member is safe and okay. Yes, it's important for meeting regulatory requirements, but it's also important for, in case there is an emergency, you have a log to refer to of, okay, where was this worker last seen? Where was this worker last contacted with? We have that record to refer to so that we can provide emergency assistance quickly as needed. Again, at Coast, these records need to include the locations, date, time, and name of the workers, and we keep our records for on-site and archived for 7 years. So Coast Mental Health's Working Alone or in Isolation program is designed to protect the health and safety of any staff who may find themselves without immediate assistance. And the responsibilities are pretty clearly outlined. So Corey and Tigran spoke about them quite a bit. So I'll just summarize that in our standard operating procedures, employers and senior leaders are responsible to assess the workplace risks and tasks. Managers and supervisors are the ones who need to ensure that staff are trained, that check-ins are being completed, and that records are kept. And workers need to follow procedure, communicate activities, and report concerns. The safety department reviews the Working Alone program's effectiveness, and our joint committees and health and safety worker reps support ongoing improvements. So I want to share a real story here. At one of our administrative offices, a new employee, they were pretty young, new to Coast and new to the role. She was working at the front desk. And she started during COVID when the building was quiet. But as restrictions started to lift, more clients and couriers started coming through our front door. And so although the staff person did have a radio, which she could connect to with other staff on site who had radios, we realized that we needed a stronger safety measure here. Something more practicable could be implemented. And so after revisiting our violence risk assessment, we installed a panic button under the counter, which if pressed, it triggers an alarm in the back office where a worker is sure to be, and that helps to ensure there's a rapid response from on-site staff. Okay. Now, physical safety is a precondition of psychological safety, and at Coast, we take physical safety seriously to show our commitment to employee well-being. So some other controls that we've implemented include installing barriers to delineate staff-only areas. For example, half doors where medication is dispensed, and half doors to offices. We've purpose-built or purpose-renovated some of our buildings to increase visibility and sight lines, as well as improve means of communications. So that includes anything from having intercoms from the staff office to the client suites or rooms, more CCTV cameras, both inside and outside, especially in confined, like tight spaces like elevators, and clear sight lines from the staff office. Radios for all staff, no exceptions. Enhanced exterior lightings. And again, enforcing those strict protocols. So never entering clients' rooms alone and never meeting behind closed doors. If a worker who's working alone or in isolation can't be reached, this is our provision for emergency rescue. It's summarized in a little diagram. If they can't be reached by their supervisor or their designated worker or shift buddy from their sister site after 3 consecutive tries, then immediate help must be called and provisions for emergency rescue followed. So just as I wrap up, we do face many challenges, changing client flow, onboarding new staff, and evolving risks and evolving environments. So as an example, after conducting violence risk assessments, we found that some sites needed additional controls like improved lighting and physical barriers. And staff feedback is really crucial for this process. We really encourage open communication and we adapt our procedures based on real-world experiences. Technology also plays a role. Radios, panic buttons, intercoms, and CCTV all help to keep staff connected and safe. And training. Training is ongoing with regular refreshers and drills to make sure that everyone knows what to do in an emergency. Before I wrap up with my last few slides, I want to highlight just 2 practical initiatives that we implemented in the last few years. So in the fall of 2022, Coast Mental Health started to track working alone in our incident and near miss reporting and investigation system, our internal system. And what this did was it actually allowed us to track and break down data in all sorts of ways to help us understand where working alone or in isolation might be posing a greater risk, looking at the frequency and the location. And so through this initiative, we learned that in the last 2 fiscal years, on average, 1 in every 7 near misses reported involves a worker working alone or in isolation. Another cool benefit of tracking working alone in your incident reporting system is you gain insights into when and where employee safety occurrences related to working alone are actually happening. And so at Coast Mental Health, we analyzed our data and noticed that common areas and staff offices were actually the most frequent locations. Meanwhile, the top 3 most frequent times of day were around 1 p.m. and 4 p.m., which are common meal times for our live-in or housing sites. And so that all happened in 2022. And then about a year later, we thought, what else can we improve? And so in 2023, in the fall, we actually took the step to embed another layer into how we verify that working alone check-in records or working alone check-ins are being done. Okay, so what we did was we updated an existing tool, our safety inspection checklist and procedure to include an account for working alone. We actually just added a line item to the checklist called our working alone check-ins being done, submitted as per our SOP. And And because these inspections are submitted by both the worker and the supervisor at each of our sites and programs, and they're submitted to the safety department for spot review, we found this extra layer has really increased accountability and helped us around due diligence. Okay, well, employee well-being and support. So physical safety, as I mentioned, is just one part of well-being. We also focus on mental health and resilience. And our Care Corner employee health and wellness program, which is pictured here on our intranet Coast Connect, it provides resources and support that are available for staff to help them manage stress and stay connected. And we encourage all staff to check in with themselves and each other to foster a culture of care and belonging. So in the end, we have found here at Coast Mental Health, as the employer, that our workers and even our clients and guests and other people we support, everyone benefits from a proactive approach to identifying risks and resources to mitigate the risks associated with working alone. Thank you, and now I'll pass it over back to Jackie.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you to all our great speakers today. You gave lots of amazing information, and hopefully our participants will be able to implement these in their facilities and organizations. So we're going to start the Q&A section now, session now, and if anyone needs to leave, please free to do so. We will be sending a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this session. But if you do have time, please feel free to also stay for the Q&A session here. So I'm just gonna go to the Q&A. Again, if you do have any questions, you feel free to text it in the chat or use the Q&A box on the bottom bar of your Zoom app there. So one question here. This is for Natalia. Does Coast Mental Health use or have considered an app?
Hello? It
Yep, you
seems
can
my
hear.
video was still not working, but as long as my
Yeah.
audio is there. Thanks for the question, Weston. At this time, we are not using an app. Prior to my time, there were some pilots done, but at this point in time, no, we are not using an app, but we are open to using an app if we're able to show that it will actually benefit our staff that are at the highest risk.
Okay. Thank you, Natalia. I have another question here. Wondering which page of your website can help with putting together an informal health and safety plan. Nearly 100% of our family employers we help have only one or two staff working in low hazard classification unit positions. However, their workers usually work alone in a home or in the community. Yeah, so I can probably answer that question. So on our CSSHSA website, Tigran did mention that we are working on a program builder, and this is just the start of it. I know there was only a few pages there, but we are working on building basically a whole health and safety program on the website. But yeah, that's a work in progress at the moment. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
And can I just say,
Oh yeah, go ahead,
to
Tegan.
Allison, like I think what you're looking for sounds like the plan template. So you can utilize that to get your working alone set up, if I'm understanding your question correctly. So just go to our program builder, click on working alone, and then you'll see a plan template there that you can use to kind of set up a simple working alone procedure for your organization.
Thank you, Tegan. Next question. Are home share contractors workers? Should they be under the purview of the agency's Josh? Yeah.
That's a good question. I would say yes, they are workers. Um, Whether you include them on your Josh or not depends on the situation. Oftentimes, if you include contractors on your committees, then you have to ask for a variance. So you might not necessarily want to do that. Yeah, depending how many contractor workers you have, you might ask them to have their own worker representative or committee. So it really depends on the question. It's not so simple to answer. In my experience, we've done both. Sometimes you want to do contractors and include them as part of collaboration because as an employer, if you're overseeing contractors on your site, you want to, communicate with them in an effective way. So sometimes the best way is to include them on the Josh committee, but then that sometimes causes issues in terms of like the regulation because you might need to have a variance for that committee and things like that. So it really, there's different practices that you can do. Um, I would say like it really depends on your situation.
Thank you, Tegan. Um, Allison noted, yeah, she's having trouble finding out what WorkSafe actually requires for an informal plan. Um, that's what their website says is needed, but can only see guidelines for less formal or formal health and safety plans.
Oh, okay. I think I know what you're talking about, Allison. We're working on a template for a health and safety manual, and that will be published sometime next year. I think I know which section of the regulation you're referring to. You can always reach out to us and have a consultation with us after the session, and we can chat about your needs.
Thank you, Tigran. All right. Um, any other questions for our speakers? Okay, well, if there's no other questions, um, just give me 1 minute here. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for our webinar. And yeah, so yeah, hopefully you gained a lot of knowledge and resources for your organizations to promote a health and safe work environment. So please stay tuned and subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't done so. The registration page is right on our website, and our next webinar will be integration of human and organizational performance, also known as HOP. So yeah, also all participants will receive a follow-up email with the link to the recording for today. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a
Thank
great day.
you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia and Corey and Therese and Jackie and Savannah. Another great session. Awesome. Well done.
Yes,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
coming. See you next webinar, hopefully, and happy holidays.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy holidays. First one said.
That's what I'm.
My first official happy holidays.
Yeah.
Gonna be December next week.
Yeah. We're almost there.
Indeed, we are. Okay. Thanks all. Take care.
Thanks so